All right, everybody, get ready. Because today we are going deep into the world of mental imagery.
Yeah.
Well, maybe I should say the extremes of mental imagery, right? Have you ever tried to picture something in your mind and just nothing really comes up?
Yeah.
Others can practically watch a whole movie in their heads.
Right.
It's wild. And that's exactly what we're diving into today. We're talking about aphantasia and hyperphantasia. You might have heard these terms, but honestly, until recently, they haven't really been on the radar, have they?
It's true. They really highlight how differently all of our minds work. We assume everyone experiences the world in the same way. But aphantasia and hyperphantasia, they really show us just how diverse, how unique our minds really are.
Absolutely. And for those who maybe haven't heard these terms before, when we say visualize, what's the first thing that pops into your head?
Yeah.
Hold that thought, because today we're looking at two ends of the spectrum. Aphantasia, where that picture, that mental image might be totally missing, completely blank. And then there's hyperphantasia, where it's like, whoa,
Yeah.
almost overwhelmingly vivid.
Exactly.
So let's start unpacking this with aphantasia. And it's fascinating. We were saying how we all kind of picture things differently. Aphantasia wasn't even a formally recognized term until 2015.
Yeah.
That's crazy, right?
It is remarkable, isn't it? And even more so when you realize that it was first observed way back in the 1880s by Sir Francis Galton. Makes you wonder why it took so long to gain any real scientific attention.
It really does. It was hiding in plain sight all that time. Yeah. So for someone with aphantasia, if you ask them to picture, let's say, a big juicy orange, would anything even appear in their mind's eye?
If you ask someone with aphantasia to picture an orange, they wouldn't see it the way you or I might. No internal image, no burst of color, no mental recreation of that fruit whatsoever. It'd be like switching on a movie, but the screen's just blank.
Really? Wow. A completely blank canvas.
Yeah.
But here's what I find so interesting. It doesn't necessarily mean there's anything wrong with their brains, right? They can still think, they still function. They just don't experience these mental images the same way.
Absolutely.
And in fact, the research you sent over actually points to some really specific neurological differences in individuals with aphantasia, right?
Yeah, definitely. Studies suggest that people with aphantasia tend to have less activity in the visual cortex. That's the part of the brain that processes what we see, especially when they're trying to use mental imagery.
So it's like that visual center, it's not lighting up as much as it might in someone who can easily conjure up those mental images.
Yeah.
But they're still, living their lives, forming memories, navigating the world.
Exactly.
It's amazing. One of the articles you shared actually mentioned this guy named Jonas Schlatter. I don't know if you remember that story.
Yes.
It's wild.
Yeah.
He went through his entire life not realizing that his experience was any different from anyone else's.
Yeah.
It wasn't until a conversation, just a casual conversation about imagining things, that he had this aha moment and realized, wait, you guys actually see things in your head?
Wild, right. It just goes to show, we really can't assume everyone experiences the world the same way. Even when we're talking about something as fundamental as mental imagery, it's such a subjective thing.
Absolutely. It really makes you think, what other aspects of our inner lives are completely different from person to person?
Right.
What other things are we assuming are universal when they're really not?
Yeah.
But let's talk about memory for a second. If you can't visualize past events, does that mean your memories are less vivid or less detailed?
It's a great question, and honestly, researchers are still trying to figure that out definitively. But studies are showing it's kind of a mixed bag,
Okay, so it's complicated.
A little bit, yeah.
Okay.
For factual memory, like remembering dates and names and historical events, people with aphantasia often do just fine, just as well as anyone else.
Interesting. So no real difference there.
It seems that way. Where things get a bit more interesting is with something called autobiographical memory. Those are the memories that are tied to your personal experiences, emotions, those kinds of things.
Oh, okay. So like remembering your 10th birthday party, that kind of thing.
Exactly. Someone with aphantasia might be able to tell you the date of their party, who was there, maybe even the presents they got. But when it comes to those really sensory details, the taste of the cake, the feeling of unwrapping a present, what the room looked like, those might be less vivid or in some cases even totally absent.
So instead of it being like a home video playing in their head, it's more like bullet points from the event.
In a way, yeah.
Wow. See, this is what I find so fascinating. How are their brains compensating for that lack of visual input? What are they drawing on when they're forming and accessing those memories.
It seems like their brains might be drawing on different strengths,
All right.
like maybe leaning more heavily on verbal descriptions or the emotions tied to those memories.
So instead of picturing their childhood home, they might recall the sound of their mom's voice or the feeling of safety and warmth they associate with that place.
Right. It's like those memories are written in a different language, one that doesn't rely as much on visual elements.
That's incredible. It
Yeah.
really makes you rethink how memories are formed and how we access them, right? It's not just about replaying a visual recording. It's about tapping into this network of associations across different senses and emotions.
Hmm?
Fascinating. But okay, we've spent some time with aphantasia, this blank canvases idea. Let's jump to the other side of the spectrum now. Hyperphantasia. So if aphantasia is like watching a movie with a blank screen, is it fair to say that hyperphantasia is like stepping right into the movie itself?
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. With hyperphantasia, those mental images are just so vivid, almost real. Colors are more intense, details are sharper, even more so than in real life sometimes.
Wow. Okay. So let's go back to that orange we were picturing earlier.
Hmm.
If someone with hyperphantasia is thinking about an orange, would they just see it or would they experience it with like multiple senses?
Oh, they could totally experience it with multiple senses.
Okay.
We're talking maybe picturing the texture of the peel, feeling the weight of the orange in their hand, almost smelling that citrusy scent.
Wait, they might even smell it. What about the other senses, like taste?
It's possible. While visual imagery tends to be the most dominant for most people with hyperphantasia, some do report experiencing all the senses really vividly. There's even a potential link to synesthesia.
Synesthesia. Wait, isn't that where people taste words or they see sounds as colors?
Exactly.
Wow. Okay, I've heard of it, but so is there an actual connection between the two?
Well, it's still being researched, but that potential overlap, it suggests that maybe both conditions, hyperphantasia and synesthesia, they might stem from a similar place neurologically.
So it's like some brains were just wired for these richer, more interconnected sensory experiences.
That's fascinating. What about how common this is? Is hyperphantasia as rare as aphantasia? Or are there a bunch of people out there walking around with these like super vivid
That's the
imaginations?
thing. It actually might be more common than aphantasia. Research is still kind of new, but some studies suggest that maybe 3% of people experience hyperphantasia. Wow. So potentially more people have these almost superpower imaginations
Yeah.
than those who experience the total lack of mental imagery with aphantasia.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. But that also makes me wonder, with great imaginative power, maybe there's some challenges that come along with it too. I mean, is it all like sunshine and roses to have a mind that's constantly creating these vivid experiences? Or is there a potential downside? It's like having this incredible gift, this internal superpower, but maybe one that needs a bit of an instruction manual so you can use it properly.
Yeah, I like that. Like any powerful tool, hyperphantasia comes with both really amazing advantages, but also some challenges too.
For sure, for sure.
Like, on one hand, think about the creative potential. Someone who's a writer or an artist or even an engineer, they could basically work out their ideas in their mind, right? They're experiencing every little detail as if it were real.
Oh, absolutely. No more spending a ton of money on prototypes or mock-ups. They can just imagine it into existence.
Right.
But I can also see how that could be a little bit of a double-edged sword, right?
Yeah.
What about just everyday distractions? If a random thought can suddenly trigger this sensory overload, how do you stay focused?
That's a big one, for sure. That's one of the most common challenges people with hyperphantasia talk about. It's like having this HD TV playing in your mind all the time. And while that's awesome for creativity, for problem solving, it can also make it hard to tune out distractions or even tell the difference between a super vivid memory and something that actually happened.
So it's almost like the line between imagination and reality gets a little blurry.
Exactly. And then we have to think about the emotional side of this too. If those really positive visualizations are amplified, what does that mean for negative emotions? Are those more intense as well? That's something else researchers are looking into.
That's really interesting. So if your mind can create these incredibly joyful, exhilarating experiences, does that also mean that anxieties, fears, or even those tough memories are also much more, I don't know, real and distressing?
Yeah, that's the question. Managing how intense those experiences are is going to be key, which is why things like coping mechanisms and mindfulness, learning how to navigate that whole spectrum of emotions, the really high highs and the really low lows, that becomes super important.
It really makes you appreciate just how different everyone's experience of the world is, right? We've got these two conditions, aphantasia and hyperphantasia. They seem like total opposites, but they both teach us so much about how our brains work, how we process information, how we create these inner worlds.
And get this, They both seem to run in families. Like there's a genetic component, which is really fascinating.
So if your parents both have these incredibly vivid imaginations, you might be more likely to have that same kind of imagination.
It seems that way.
That makes me wonder how much of this is nature, how much is nurture. Is it all in our genes, or do our experiences growing up, the environments we're in, do those play a role in how we visualize things?
That is a question researchers are dying to answer. It's probably a little bit of both, right? It's this mix of our genetics and what we're exposed to. Maybe it's things we experience in early childhood, different sensory stimuli, even our culture. All of that could affect how our brains develop and how we process these mental images.
It's amazing to think about. It's like this whole hidden world inside our heads, and we're just starting to peek behind the curtain and figure out how it all works. So, as we wrap up our deep dive today, what are the big takeaways you really want to leave with our listeners? What do you hope they walk away thinking about?
I think the biggest thing to remember is how different everyone's experiences really are. Aphantasia and hyperphantasia, they show us that there's no normal when it comes to how we perceive, how we imagine, even how we remember things. What one person takes for granted might be totally foreign to someone else, and that's more than, okay, that's amazing.
We always say it, but it's so important.
Yeah,
Celebrating those differences, that's what makes life interesting.
absolutely. And beyond just celebrating that neurodiversity, understanding these conditions, it could change so much. Imagine what we could do in education, tailoring how we teach to how different students learn best, or in therapy, using mental imagery to help people in totally new ways. The possibilities are incredible.
It's like this whole new frontier of understanding the human mind, and we're just at the very beginning. We've covered so much today, from the blank canvas of aphantasia to that ultra HD world of hyperphantasia. But this is really just the start, right?
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
If today has taught us anything, it's that the most amazing discoveries, they often start with one simple question. And who knows, maybe this deep dive will be that spark for someone listening. Maybe it'll lead to new research or even just new conversations. And that's what we want, right? To keep these conversations about the human mind going, because it's a journey without end.
I love that. It really is a journey.
And on that note, until next time, keep those imaginations running wild.